Hey everybody, I'm Tom Arbuthnot, Solutions Director at Pure IP, and this is Pure IP Coffee Club. I'm excited about this one. It's a really hot topic. We're talking about analog and two different types of analog, actually, carrier side analog and customer side analog devices. And my special guest is Chris Wheeler. Chris, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, no worries at all. Hi guys, Chris Wheeler here, Senior Technical Specialist at Microsoft, working mainly in public sector.
Chris is one of my go-tos at Microsoft when I have a gnarly question about particularly telephony or analog. Chris, you're pretty deep into it.
Yeah, it's certainly been an interesting topic. Certainly analog isn't dead in some cases, so it's good to see teams supporting that.
Let's talk about the two types of analog, because there's this big press and worry about the analog switch off, and yet we've just seen Microsoft Teams release analog support. So what's the difference there?
Yeah, so I think the carrier side, obviously, in terms of the PSTN side of connecting to the net, connecting out and making outbound calls is one thing. So certainly things like ISDN, being switched off by 2025 is quite edging closer. We're seeing
we're in 2023 now. It really, there's not much more putting it off, is there?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Like you say, it's ISDN and traditional copper in the ground is being cut off essentially by 2025.
Yeah, exactly. And customers have been notified of this ever since it first got announced. I think it was something like 3-4 years ago. It's been looming, and obviously people have been starting to think about it a little bit more. You've got some that like to keep it very close to the cutoff date. But it's kind of yeah, exactly. But sometimes there's either people who do it in their own time, but then at the same time, they do get a certain cut-off date by their carriers. So like BT have done a load of cut-offs already. I think Salisbury was the first place to actually go full SIP.
So it is, isn't it? That's a really good point. It's not like suddenly there's a drop date and everybody goes. Actually, it's doing it region
not going
by
to be
region.
Yeah, it's not a cut over, definitely. So that's the carrier side. So obviously, in terms of what customers are looking at doing, there are some options around. Obviously, you do have some analog converters where you can still utilize your analog phones and PBX systems and utilize SIP, and you just there's a media converter that you can put in place. So they are slowly. It's a good solution. Obviously, if you do still want to sweat your assets out, but actually, it's a good point to start thinking about modernizing in terms of if you've got a phone system that's lasted you 20 odd years, the future's kind of going more unified communications. There's a lot more inclusion within meetings. So it's a good sort of opportunity to look at the whole system rather than just, okay, here's the PSTN carrier side. Now we need to really start looking at how we can really start to help our workforce benefit them from loads of different ways of communication as well. So that obviously then leads on to the PBX side of things. So you've then got your analog systems, things like your analog phones, your fax machines.
Yeah, and the difference here is these are now hanging off your PBX. So rather than getting a copper line in the ground from your carrier, you're now terminating that analog device to your classic PBX. And obviously, a lot of people are on a journey to get rid of those classic PBXs, just like the analog switch off is happening. So what can customers do? They're moving to Microsoft Teams, they're going UCaaS, but like you say, they've got some DECT in play, they've got some analog devices in play, they've got lift phones, or they've got door access, that kind of thing. How can they terminate those?
Yeah, really good question. See, I think with when Teams got launched initially, it was always cloud only. All of the sort of OEM manufacturers going, okay, Android based native Teams devices. Obviously, we've got our headsets for our PCs and our other devices anyway. So like things like Bluetooth as well. When it came to analog, it was always quite a difficult conversation a couple of years ago that actually, in terms of getting that linked up, it was always done through the SBC. So in terms of setting up Teams with an SBC, that worked really well through things like direct routing. And then off the back end of it, you then have an FXS port for your analog devices. And then that had a direct connection out to PSTN through SIP, for example.
Yeah, I think that would be being more or less side by side with Teams. So you'd have your session board controlling your audio code or your
exactly.
or whatever.
And
the two could talk together, but like they weren't integrated as such.
Yeah, it wasn't there on the directory. You dialed a DI number or an extension number, and then you managed to get through to that device. But it wasn't very useful in terms of if you wanted that analog system to be part of the PBX and be discovered by your users, actually it made sense to bring it into the Teams ecosystem. So what we've effectively done is we've opened up the SIP gateway to support analog gateways. So you'll have things like your audio codes, media packs for one. I think there's a few more that are coming out to be properly certified, but I've been playing around with the audio codes quite nicely. So, yeah, exactly. It is a very good solution because obviously you can link it up to Teams. It registers the port actually with the media, the analog gateways, and your phone would then be connected up, linked to a license, and then with an identity, you can then find that device. You can search for it within Teams. You can call it and pass calls across to it. And then I think later on this year, It's going to then be included with things like more advanced routing, so your call queues, your auto attendance. If that is going to be a scenario where you use it, generally where we do see it, especially within the public sector, will be mainly for the public. So you'll have things like care homes, libraries, where these devices, whilst there are better devices for things like your meetings, instant messaging, video, and all that good stuff, there is still a need just to have a direct line outside to make a call, calling family, calling emergency services. And actually, these analog devices fits really well within this conversation.
Yeah, and like you said, there might be like specialist device types as well that you often see that still terminate analog. So they might have a phone in a care home that has particularly large buttons or wall mounts in a certain way.
Yeah.
And there's not an equivalent teamed IP phone. So you can just have a physical analog telephony adapter registered directly to Microsoft SIP gateway in the cloud. And it'll all be integrated to Teams. Like you say, contact is really important. So being able to search in the Teams directory for care home Bracknell, it is much easier than having to manually look for a PSTN, a traditional number, to go ring that internal analog line.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And also you touched on it as well with things like decked handsets, those sort of scenarios, say you've got warehouse workers or staff where they are sharing devices, is still very prevalent. And moving forward, I know that there are, I think Spectralink do their Teams devices as well. So they are slowly coming on board to look at replacing with more modern technology, but actually in terms of what you've already got, it's a really useful scenario to repurpose those devices.
Yeah. So there's lots to consider here in this under this analog or PSTN switch off. So you've got the carrier side analog termination into your business is going to be turned off. And when you think about that, think about, as you said, Chris, fax lines, modems, also lift phones, alarms, EPOS systems, things you might not have naturally thought. Alarms are a classic one. Like people are like, oh, we've been on SIP trunks for years. What about your alarms? Oh, yeah, they have a line. And most of those systems are moving to IP now anyways. That you just need to do an audit of that. That's the carrier side stuff. For your analog that's terminating inside your business on your PBX, then you're on a journey to that cloud, UCaaS, Microsoft Teams model. That's where you need to think about either A, having the session border controller and terminating them directly, which is a valid model. And like you say, you can call between the two systems, but they don't know about each other really. It's just calling a number. Or one of those certified analog telephony adapters that register to Microsoft SIP gateway in the cloud. And then you're going to get the analog contacts being a bit more integrated to Teams.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've done this config on the ATAs, obviously, Chris. What is it tricky? Is it easy? Like how hard is it?
I think when I first tried it, it was still in a preview stage. So trying to get the right ISO files, the configuration files was one thing. Lucky enough, I got a really good relationship with Audio Code, so they were graceful to lend me that and just to use it and then obviously get that all registered on the network. But once that's all done, the steps are really simple. There's some blogs now from, obviously I made that video. There was a guy called Rob Watts from Microsoft, really good solution architect. He's done a good blog as well that I think is also out there on LinkedIn and other websites, which is great. So yeah, the steps are really simple. I think the main thing is once it is there on the network, I think the main thing then to consider is how do you manage, that device effectively? Things like prioritizing network traffic. There's other things that plays a part with getting a good solution in place.
You make a really good point about management there, because those analog telephony devices are physical devices that need to be maintained, firmware updated. And so when you're doing this solution, one way or another, either your telco or your Microsoft partner is looking after those devices and managing and patching them, or you have to take responsibility for those devices. They do have firmware, they do need to be maintained and updated.
Yep. And all the relevant sort of errors that may occur with it, it's good to obviously have that management side of things to log into those gateways, make sure everything's all working. As you said, firmware updates is massively important, making sure that everything's locked down and secure. It follows good policy and practice as well.
Awesome. Thanks for giving us the insight. It's nice to talk to somebody who's done it hands-on at Microsoft. And thanks everybody for joining us on Coffee Club. If you've got any questions about analog switch off or analog devices in your enterprise and how to best deal with them, do get in touch and we can definitely help you with that. Thanks again, Chris. We'll talk soon. Probably have you back on your Coffee Club at another time later in the year, I'm sure.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Cheers, Tom.
Great. Thanks a lot.